Hello, Capricorn. Welcome back, my beautiful souls. I'm really happy you're here. As always, take what resonates and simply leave the rest behind. For this reading, we're tuning into the energy surrounding someone who has been holding back far more than they've ever admitted. The feeling coming through is intense. It feels like someone has spent a long time trying to stay quiet, trying to stay composed, trying to convince themselves they could move on without saying what was truly on their heart. But something is changing, because the energy I'm stepping into doesn't feel comfortable with silence anymore. It feels like reflection, realization, and words that have been waiting for the right moment to finally be spoken. So let's take a look and see what the cards want to reveal. Okay, Capricorn, the first thing I'm noticing is how quiet this energy feels. Not cold, not detached, just quiet. You know when somebody has been carrying thoughts for so long that they stop talking about them altogether? That's what this feels like. I keep seeing someone sitting alone with their own mind, replaying conversations, replaying choices, replaying moments they thought they had already moved on from. And as I say that, the Hermit appears. Wow, this person feels deeply withdrawn lately. Not because they don't care, not because they've forgotten. Honestly, it feels like the opposite. It feels like they care so much that they've needed distance just to understand what they're feeling. I'm getting someone who has spent weeks, maybe even months, trying to convince themselves that staying silent was the easier option, trying to tell themselves that keeping their emotions under control was the mature thing to do. But every time they think they've reached an answer, another memory comes back, another feeling surfaces, another unanswered question finds its way into their thoughts. And Capricorn, I have to say this, the energy around this person feels exhausted, not physically, emotionally, because carrying something unsaid for too long eventually becomes heavy. The Four of Swords is here, and it feels like they've been sitting in that silence for a very long time, almost hiding inside it, using it as a safe place, a place where they wouldn't have to explain themselves, a place where they wouldn't have to risk rejection, a place where they wouldn't have to admit that their feelings never truly disappeared. You know, sometimes people think distance creates clarity, and sometimes it does, but sometimes distance simply reveals what was already there. That's what I'm getting here. Because the more space they've created between themselves and this situation, the harder it has become to ignore it. The harder it has become to pretend they don't think about you. The harder it has become to act like none of this mattered. And honestly, Capricorn, I don't think they're proud of that realization. Because sitting right beside all of this reflection is the Five of Cups. And wow, there is regret here, a lot of it. Not dramatic regret, not somebody throwing themselves on the floor crying. No, this feels quieter than that. It feels like somebody waking up in the middle of an ordinary day and suddenly remembering something they wish they had done differently. A message they never sent. A conversation they avoided. A moment they let slip away because they assumed there would always be another chance. And now those memories don't feel so distant anymore. Now they feel personal. The thing about this person is that they keep looking backward. Not because they want to live in the past, but because they're trying to understand where things changed, where they pulled away, why they stopped saying what they really felt, why they thought silence would protect them. Because the truth is, silence protected them for a while. It protected them from vulnerability. It protected them from difficult conversations. It protected them from uncertainty. But it also created distance. And I think they're beginning to see that now. I think they're beginning to understand the cost. There's this moment I'm seeing in my mind. Almost like somebody sitting alone after a long day. The room is quiet. The distractions are gone. The phone isn't ringing. Nobody needs anything from them. And for the first time, they're left alone with their own heart. That's the energy here. And that's where the Hermit keeps showing up again. Not as someone hiding, as someone searching. Searching for honesty. Searching for clarity. Searching for the courage to face something they've been avoiding. Because I don't feel avoidance anymore. I feel awareness. And that's where Judgment comes into this reading. The moment I pulled Judgment, everything shifted. The atmosphere changed. The energy became louder somehow. Like a realization finally reaching the surface. Like something they've known deep down for a long time suddenly becoming impossible to ignore. In Capricorn, it feels emotional. Because this realization isn't just about you. It's about them too. It's about who they've been, the choices they've made, the walls they've built, the things they've left unsaid, the feelings they've tried to manage instead of express. They're looking at themselves differently now. They're questioning things they once felt certain about. And honestly, I think that's what makes this so significant. Not because they're suddenly becoming a different person overnight, but because they're finally willing to look directly at something they've been turning away from. There's still hesitation here. I won't pretend there isn't. There's still fear. There's still uncertainty. There's still a part of them wondering what happens if they open the door they've kept closed for so long. But the silence doesn't feel comfortable anymore. That's the biggest thing I'm picking up. The silence that once felt safe now feels heavy. And the more they sit with it, the more difficult it becomes to carry. Because judgment keeps appearing beside the hermit, and those two together feel like someone standing at the edge of a conversation they've been postponing for far too long. They're not running from it anymore. They're staring directly at it. And Capricorn, I think that's where this story starts to become very interesting, because what they're realizing now is only the beginning of what they may eventually need to say. Because once someone starts being honest with themselves, they begin noticing things they overlooked before. And that's exactly where this energy is taking me. It's almost like they're looking back at this connection from a completely different perspective now, not through fear, not through pride, not through confusion, but through appreciation. And honestly, Capricorn, that realization feels bigger than they expected. The Queen of Pentacles is sitting here so beautifully. The moment I saw her, I immediately felt your energy. Not because you've been trying to prove your worth, not because you've been demanding recognition. Actually, quite the opposite. What stands out is your consistency. The way you've shown up, the way you've remained grounded even when things felt uncertain, the way you've carried yourself with quiet strength. And I think that's what this person is finally beginning to understand. Because there is a difference between people who simply come into our lives and people who become part of our foundation. This person is realizing that you were never just another connection. You were someone they could lean on, someone they could trust, someone whose presence felt steady even during periods when everything else seemed unstable. You know, sometimes people don't recognize the value of consistency until they experience inconsistency everywhere else. And that's exactly what I'm picking up. This person has been observing, watching, comparing, not intentionally at first, but life has a funny way of revealing things. They've met other people, had other conversations, experienced other dynamics, and somehow those experiences keep bringing them back to the same conclusion. Nobody feels quite like you. Nobody brings the same sense of comfort. Nobody creates the same feeling of peace. And I don't mean perfect peace. I mean that feeling where you can finally put your guard down, where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to be someone else, where you can simply exist. That's what keeps coming through. The Queen of Pentacles doesn't feel loud in this reading. She feels dependable. And the more this person reflects on the past, the more they're recognizing how rare that actually is. Because reliability isn't flashy. Patience isn't flashy. Loyalty isn't flashy. Sometimes people overlook those qualities until they're no longer standing right in front of them. And wow, that realization is hitting harder than they expected. The Six of Cups is showing itself now, and suddenly the energy softens. I keep seeing memories, little moments, things that probably seemed ordinary at the time. A conversation, a laugh, a gesture, a look. The kind of moments that don't seem important until they're gone. And this person is replaying those moments over and over, not because they're trying to live in the past, but because they're beginning to see those memories differently. It's almost like they missed the significance of them when they were actually happening. Back then, they may have assumed there would always be more time, more opportunities, more chances to say what they meant. But now those memories feel precious, almost sacred in a way. And there's gratitude attached to them. That's what surprises me most, the gratitude. Because this person isn't only thinking about what they received from you. They're thinking about everything you gave without expecting anything back. The understanding, the patience, the support, the moments when you chose kindness even when you had every reason not to. They're seeing those things now, maybe more clearly than ever before. And as these memories continue surfacing, I see the star. Okay, this is beautiful. Because this doesn't feel dramatic. It feels hopeful. Like somebody who has spent a long time wandering through uncertainty and is finally recognizing what truly mattered. The star feels almost emotional here. Not emotional in a chaotic way, emotional in a quiet way. Like somebody staring out a window and realizing they took something special for granted. And Capricorn, what I'm hearing over and over is this. They were always there. That's the thought repeating in this person's mind. Not because you solved every problem. Not because everything was perfect. But because your energy remained genuine. And genuine people are harder to replace than most realize. This person is starting to understand that. They're starting to understand that connections built on trust don't appear every day. That emotional safety doesn't appear every day. That the feeling they experienced with you wasn't something they could simply recreate elsewhere. And honestly, I think that's been one of the biggest lessons unfolding inside them lately. Because for a while, they may have focused on what was missing. Now they're focusing on what was present all along, and that's changing everything. The Ace of Cups is emerging here, and I can feel this shift happening inside their heart. Not a sudden shift, not an impulsive shift, a genuine one. The kind that develops slowly through reflection, through honesty, through growth. What fascinates me about this energy is how humble it feels. Because this person doesn't seem focused on convincing themselves anymore. They're focused on accepting what they feel, accepting what this connection means to them, accepting how much your presence impacted their life. There's less resistance here, less running, less explaining things away, and more acknowledgement, more appreciation, more emotional truth. I keep hearing someone say, I didn't realize how much they were carrying. I didn't realize how much they gave. I didn't realize how much I depended on their presence. Those thoughts keep coming forward, and they feel sincere, because sometimes gratitude arrives quietly, not in one dramatic moment, but through hundreds of small realizations. And that's exactly what this looks like. One realization after another, one memory after another, one moment of clarity after another, until eventually the picture becomes impossible to ignore. And what they're seeing now is not just the connection itself. They're seeing you, maybe more clearly than they ever have before, which creates another question entirely. Because once someone finally recognizes the value of what they've been given, they have to decide what they're going to do about it. There's a moment in life when distractions stop working, when staying busy no longer keeps the deeper questions away. And that's exactly where this energy is taking me, because the cards in front of me feel heavier now, not negative, just honest. The kind of honesty that arrives when someone finally gets tired of running from themselves. The devil is here, and honestly, the first thing I heard was, I've been carrying this for too long. Not necessarily the connection, not necessarily you, but everything attached to it. The pressure, the expectations, the responsibilities they placed on their own shoulders. This feels like someone who believed they always had to have everything figured out before allowing themselves to feel anything. Some people are comfortable leading with their heart. This person wasn't. They kept trying to lead with logic, with plans, with obligations, with whatever demanded their attention in the immediate moment. Work may have become the focus. Goals may have become the focus. Financial stability, family obligations, reputation, the image they wanted to maintain. Whatever it was, they kept finding reasons to push emotional matters further down the list. And for a while, they convinced themselves it was necessary. They told themselves there would be time later, that feelings could wait, that difficult conversations could wait, that the connection would somehow remain exactly where they left it. But something about that mindset has started falling apart. Because I'm looking at the devil beside the moon, and it feels like someone becoming aware of patterns they didn't want to acknowledge before. Patterns they thought they had under control. Patterns that were quietly controlling them instead. The moon feels incredibly personal here. Not mysterious. Personal. Like late night thoughts nobody else hears. Like questions they never say out loud. Like moments where they suddenly stop what they're doing and realize they've been thinking about the same thing for weeks. You know, sometimes people avoid change because they're afraid of losing something. But sometimes people avoid change because they're afraid of discovering what they truly want. And I think that's closer to what's happening here. Because wanting something creates responsibility. It requires action. It requires vulnerability. It requires honesty. And honestly, I don't think this person felt ready for that before. There was always another reason to wait, another excuse, another responsibility demanding attention. But those excuses don't seem as convincing anymore. The moon keeps pulling hidden emotions toward the surface, not dramatically, gradually, like water rising. And the more it rises, the harder it becomes to pretend it isn't there. What fascinates me is how much self-pressure I'm feeling from this person. They are incredibly hard on themselves, far harder than most people realize. This isn't someone casually walking through life without caring. This is someone who constantly questions whether they're doing enough, whether they're succeeding enough, whether they're providing enough, whether they're becoming enough. And somewhere along the way, that pressure became its own prison. The devil feels connected to that, almost like they built a life around responsibilities and expectations and forgot to leave room for their own heart. Because every time their emotions tried to speak, another obligation interrupted. Every time they considered opening up, another fear appeared. Every time they thought about moving closer, something inside them pulled back. Not because they didn't care, because caring felt dangerous. And now we're reaching the point where they can finally see that. I keep hearing the words, what am I actually fighting? Wow, that's important. Because for the first time, they aren't only questioning the connection. They're questioning themselves. Questioning why they've resisted things that felt meaningful. Questioning why they've held on to fears that no longer serve them. Questioning why they've spent so much energy trying to control outcomes they could never fully control anyway. And that's where the Eight of Cups enters this story. The atmosphere shifts immediately, because this card doesn't feel sad. It feels decisive. Like somebody standing at a crossroads and realizing they can't continue carrying the same emotional baggage into the future. I see someone looking around at everything they've built, everything they've prioritized, everything they've convinced themselves was enough, and suddenly asking, why does this still feel incomplete? That's the question. Not because their achievements don't matter, not because their responsibilities don't matter, but because they've begun recognizing that success without emotional fulfillment leaves an empty space no accomplishment can completely fill. And honestly, that realization is changing them. The Eight of Cups feels like movement. Not physical movement necessarily, internal movement. A shift, a willingness to leave old coping mechanisms behind. A willingness to stop pretending they don't feel what they feel. Because pretending has become exhausting. The energy feels tired of masks, tired of avoidance, tired of unfinished chapters, and wow, the moment death appears, everything becomes even more undeniable. This isn't about endings in the way people assume. This feels like transformation. Deep transformation. The kind that changes how somebody sees themselves. The kind that changes what they value. The kind that changes what they're willing to tolerate. Because the version of this person that existed before could keep postponing emotional truth. The version emerging now doesn't seem interested in doing that anymore. The moon is still here. The devil is still here. But they're no longer controlling the story. They're being seen. They're being confronted. They're being understood. And that's creating something powerful. I keep seeing someone standing in front of a door they've walked past countless times. A door they always intended to open someday. A door they always promised themselves they'd deal with later. Except later has started feeling much closer. Because the unfinished pieces aren't disappearing. They're becoming louder. More present. More impossible to ignore. And the deeper this person goes into that realization, the more they understand something very important. The issue was never whether these feelings existed. The issue was whether they were willing to face them. And for the first time in a very long time, it feels like the answer to that question is beginning to change. What keeps standing out to me now is the amount of thought going into something that hasn't even been said yet. Because this doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel like somebody waking up one morning and suddenly deciding to pour their heart out. No, this feels measured, careful, intentional. Almost like someone rehearsing a conversation over and over in their head before they ever allow it to leave their mouth. And wow, the Ace of Swords is sitting right in the center of that energy. The moment I saw it, I felt clarity. Not perfect clarity, but enough clarity to stop hiding behind confusion. Because for a long time, confusion was convenient. Confusion allowed delays. Confusion allowed distance. Confusion allowed difficult truths to remain unsaid. But something has shifted. This person isn't looking for more time anymore. They're looking for the right words. And honestly, those are two very different things. I keep seeing someone replaying conversations that never happened. Thinking about how they would start. Thinking about what they should explain first. Thinking about whether an apology comes before an explanation. Or whether honesty comes before either of those things. There's almost a nervous energy around it. Not panic, not fear, just awareness. Awareness that some conversations carry weight. Awareness that certain words cannot be taken back once they're spoken. And I think that's why they're approaching this so carefully. The Knight of Pentacles is here, and if I could describe this person's mindset in one sentence, it would be, I want to get this right. That's it. Not perfect, not dramatic, not cinematic, just right. Because the energy I'm feeling doesn't want shortcuts anymore. This person understands that trust isn't rebuilt through grand speeches. Trust isn't rebuilt through promises. Trust is rebuilt through consistency, through showing up, through following through actions that match the words. And that's something they've been thinking about a lot. I actually feel like they've been questioning their own approach lately. Looking back and realizing there were times when they expected understanding without providing explanation. Times when they expected patience without offering reassurance. Times when they assumed their intentions were obvious when in reality their actions created uncertainty. And that realization feels humbling, not painful. Humbling. Because growth often looks exactly like this. Not somebody becoming a different person, but somebody becoming more aware of how they've impacted the people they care about. The Ace of Swords keeps pulling me back toward communication. But interestingly, not communication for the sake of talking, communication for the sake of clearing the air. There's a difference. This person isn't interested in surface-level conversations anymore. They don't want to keep discussing everything except the thing that actually matters. They don't want more distractions, more avoidance, more unfinished sentences. And honestly, I think they're getting tired of carrying around things they should have said a long time ago. The energy feels ready for transparency, ready for accountability, ready for truth, even if the truth feels uncomfortable. And that's where the Page of Pentacles enters. I love this energy because it feels genuine. There's something very sincere about it, almost innocent, like somebody approaching a situation with less ego than before, less defensiveness, less need to be right, more willingness to learn, more willingness to listen. I keep seeing someone sitting across from another person and genuinely wanting to understand their perspective, not preparing a rebuttal, not preparing an excuse, actually listening. Wow, that feels important because for some of you, the conversation they're preparing for isn't only about explaining themselves. It's about hearing what they haven't allowed themselves to hear before. The disappointment, the confusion, the hurt, the questions that never received answers. And honestly, that takes courage because it's much easier to explain yourself than it is to sit quietly and listen to how your actions affected someone else. But I feel maturity here, real maturity, the kind that develops through experience, the kind that develops through reflection, the kind that develops after someone has spent enough time alone with their own thoughts. And the more I look at this side, the more I feel like they're trying to approach this connection differently than they would have in the past. Not from a place of proving, not from a place of controlling the outcome, but from a place of honesty. The Magician's is here now. And wow, the atmosphere changes immediately because suddenly this person starts realizing they aren't as powerless as they once believed. For a long time, they may have acted as though circumstances controlled everything. Timing controlled everything. Responsibilities controlled everything. Fear controlled everything. But the Magician feels like somebody beginning to understand that choices matter. Actions matter. Effort matters. Communication matters. And perhaps most importantly, showing up matters. I keep hearing, if I care, then I need to act like I care. Simple, but powerful. Because that sentence alone seems to be changing their perspective. The Magician doesn't feel flashy here. It feels practical, like somebody finally understanding that meaningful change starts with small decisions. One conversation, one message, one honest moment, one step forward. And what's fascinating is that the closer they get to this realization, the less interested they become in making impressive promises. They're focused on credibility, on integrity, on proving things through behavior rather than declarations, because words are important. The Ace of Swords makes that very clear. But words without action don't seem good enough anymore. Not to them, not for this situation. And I think that's why they're taking their time. Not because they're uncertain about what matters, because they're considering how to approach it responsibly, how to communicate it clearly, how to avoid repeating old mistakes. The Knight of Pentacles keeps appearing beside the Magician, and together they feel like someone preparing rather than reacting, planning rather than escaping, building rather than avoiding. And honestly, the more they think about this conversation, the more they realize it isn't only about explaining the past. It's about deciding what kind of person they want to be when they finally step into the future of this connection. Something feels different now, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. Like someone who has finally stopped asking themselves whether this connection matters and started asking themselves what they want to do with that realization. And honestly, that's a much bigger question, because once emotions become real, they eventually require direction. They require intention. They require effort. And that's exactly where this energy is leading. The King of Pentacles is sitting here with such a strong presence. The moment he appeared, I felt stability. Not the kind of stability people try to impress others with, the real kind. The kind that gets built over time. The kind that shows up day after day. The kind that doesn't disappear when things become inconvenient. And what fascinates me is that this person seems to be thinking differently about relationships now. Not as something temporary, not as something that simply exists when life feels easy, but as something worth investing in, something worth protecting, something worth building. I keep getting this image of someone standing at the foundation of a house, not looking at the roof, not looking at the decorations, looking at the structure itself, asking whether it can support something lasting. And that's exactly how this person feels. Their focus has shifted away from immediate emotions and toward long-term possibilities, because feelings are important. But they're starting to realize that consistency matters too. Trust matters. Shared goals matter. The ability to build a life with someone matters. And that's where the King of Pentacles keeps drawing my attention. This isn't someone dreaming about a future anymore. This feels like someone wondering how that future could actually be created. What steps would need to happen? What changes would need to happen? What responsibilities would need to be shared? And wow, that level of thoughtfulness feels very different from the energy we started with, because now I see the Queen of Pentacles standing beside him. And honestly, this pairing feels beautiful, not because it's perfect, not because there are no challenges, but because there is mutual respect woven through it. What this person keeps coming back to is how naturally your energy fits into their vision of stability. The Queen of Pentacles feels familiar to them, comforting, grounded, safe. Not safe because life becomes easy around you. Safe because they feel understood around you. And there's a difference. I think they've spent a lot of time observing people, watching how relationships function, watching how people show up for one another, watching what lasts and what falls apart. And somewhere during all of that observation, they started seeing you differently, not as a temporary chapter, not as someone who simply passed through their life, but as someone whose presence continued to matter even when distance existed, even when circumstances changed, even when silence entered the picture. That significance never completely disappeared. And now they're beginning to ask themselves why. Why does this connection continue returning to their thoughts? Why does your energy continue feeling familiar? Why do they still imagine you standing beside them when they think about the future? Those questions keep surfacing, and I don't think they can ignore them anymore. The Wheel of Fortune is here now, and honestly, this card feels like perspective. Like someone suddenly looking back and realizing how much has changed inside them. Not because life became easier, but because they've become more aware, more conscious, more honest. There are moments in life when we recognize we've reached a turning point. Not because somebody announces it, not because there's a dramatic event, but because something inside us no longer wants to return to the way things were. That's exactly what this feels like. This person doesn't seem interested in repeating old cycles, the same avoidance, the same uncertainty, the same excuses. The Wheel of Fortune feels like somebody recognizing that growth only matters if it creates movement. And movement is exactly what appears when the Chariot enters the reading. Okay, now things start feeling alive again, not chaotic, purposeful. The Chariot feels like direction, like somebody choosing a path and committing to it. And what's interesting is that this energy doesn't feel focused on perfection. It feels focused on progress. Because for a long time, they may have believed they needed every answer before taking a step, every certainty before making a decision, every guarantee before opening their heart. But life doesn't work that way. Relationships don't work that way. And I think they're beginning to understand that. The Chariot feels like someone learning that meaningful things require courage, not reckless courage, steady courage. The kind that says, I don't know exactly how everything unfolds from here, but I know standing still isn't helping. And wow, that realization feels incredibly important, because standing still has become uncomfortable. The future has started asking for participation, for action, for intention. And honestly, this person seems more willing to engage with that than they have been in a very long time. The energy keeps moving forward until it reaches the Ten of Cups, and the atmosphere softens immediately. There's something deeply emotional about this card appearing at the end of this story. Not because it promises anything, not because it guarantees outcomes, but because it reveals what this person values. And what they value isn't status, it isn't appearances. It isn't proving something to the world. It's connection, it's belonging, it's emotional fulfillment. It's having people in their life who genuinely matter. The Ten of Cups feels less like a fantasy and more like a realization. A realization that happiness often looks simpler than we expect. A shared conversation, a sense of partnership, a feeling of being understood, a feeling of building something meaningful together. And the more I sit with this energy, the more I feel this person imagining possibilities they once refused to consider. Not because they're suddenly becoming someone different, because they're finally allowing themselves to want what they truly want. The King of Pentacles, the Queen of Pentacles, the Wheel of Fortune, the Chariot, the Ten of Cups. Together they tell a story that feels remarkably grounded. A story about someone who has stopped looking for temporary answers and started thinking about lasting ones. And honestly, the closer they move toward that truth, the harder it becomes to imagine moving forward without finding out where this connection could actually lead. And that's where I'm going to leave this reading today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and allowing me to read this energy with you. Honestly, this felt like a story about reflection, growth, and the kind of truth that becomes impossible to ignore once the heart is ready to face it. Whether this message resonates with your situation completely or only in small pieces, I hope it gave you something to think about. Remember, not every chapter changes because of one big moment. Sometimes change begins quietly through awareness, through understanding, and through the choices people make when nobody else is watching. For now, take care of yourself, protect your peace, and continue moving forward in the way that feels right for you. Thank you again for being here. Your support, your energy, and your presence truly mean more than you know. If you enjoyed this reading, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing from you. Until our next reading, take good care of yourself. Bye for now.